Okay, can everyone hear me? I know there's someone way in the back. Can you hear me while I speak? Okay, just wanted to check. Okay, so I'm going to jump in, and again, I'll try to make this as efficient and useful as possible, and then we'll jump into Q&A. I neglected to mention that we will have a panel come up for the question and answer. While I can present on a lot of the generalities and have a lot of information about this, a lot of the questions we had were legal and financial in nature. So we will have our solicitor up here, we'll have our director of finance, we'll also have our director of sustainability join as well. Okay, so where we were. So when we came into the office 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, this is the situation of the city. We have high taxes, we still do. That's going to continue unless we do something different. Limited funding for schools and infrastructure. I think this is a topic that we've heard a lot about over the last several years. When you walk into a school building, it's obvious. And we're trying to make steps and make investments so that our school buildings and public buildings are in better condition. Constrained ability to provide services. I think that speaks for itself. Low bond ratings, which basically means, you know, we could not get good financing to borrow for roads, sidewalks, bridges. No rainy day fund, which is essentially the equivalent of not having a savings account. So if, I don't know, someone steals 4 of your tires off your car, like my car last week, you aren't actually able to pay to get those tires put back on. The city was in that situation. And then the looming unfunded...
You're a liar. It's shameful.
Looming unfunded pension liability. So that is what we are here to talk about this evening. How did we get here? The city made promises it could not keep. It made one promise and then did not pay for those promises. In 1991, the city agreed to provide retirees increases in their retirement of 5 to 6% per year. What that means is that if you made $50,000 when you retired and you got a $30,000 retirement, over the course of the next several years, that would compound so that in 2012, you have a retirement benefit of over $100,000 per year. We no longer do that, but we still have to pay for it. Additionally, between 1994 and 2012, the city did not make its full contributions to its pension fund. So it wasn't paying for the benefits that it was offering its retirees. Over the course of that time, the 17 years that did not happen, the fund was short funded by $121 million, which in today's world is $400 million. You say, how did that increase so quickly? Well, imagine if you had a $1,000 bill due on your credit card balance, you didn't pay it, and then you left it sit there year after year after year. That $1,000 is going to turn into $2,000, into $3,000, and it's going to turn into an amount that's going to be hard for you to pay off. That is what has happened to the city.
Private companies charge higher interest.
So schedule of the unfunded pension liability, you can see here. I don't know if this thing has a pointer. Okay. Over the course of the last 20 years, this is the line of the unfunded pension liability. You can see that it is spiked up. That is attributed to what I just talked about. Again, the city was not making its full payments, and it was providing benefits to retirees that it could not afford. This line going down is the funded ratio. So you can also see, as it was, as the liability was going up, the ratio at which the fund was funded kept going down. So what have we done to fix it? Obviously, we're here to talk to you about one solution, but we felt like it was really important to talk about the things that the administration has done with support of the council and the public to advance a better financial condition for the city. First, we've had 3 years of consecutive surpluses within the city. That can be attributed to better budgeting and a strong economy. We've also increased our funding to the school department. That's the first time in 7 years that the city has put more funding into the school system. As we look at an evening off of the school funding formula, this is going to continue to be important so that our kids can get the education that they deserve. We made 100% of our pension payments as well, and that is true in the past administration. So we have started to make the right moves to put the city on the right path. However, just taking good actions in the current budget year is not enough to fix this looming bigger issue that we're facing. I neglected to mention before that the city now has close to a $1 billion pension liability. $1 billion. What have we done to fix it? So I talked about short-term funding, things that we have done year over year. We've also improved our credit ratings. That's because we've done better budgeting and the economy is better. This is great because it means we can borrow at lower interest rates for infrastructure investments, like Brett or like.
For credit ratings.
Okay, like borrowing for roads, bridges, sidewalks, parks improvements, recreation center improvements. We also have an improving business climate. So this is a little bit hard to see, but we track how the economy is doing by how many permits are pulled. So basically, obviously, if you're doing work in the city, you pull permits to do that work. All of our permanent revenue has actually up almost threefold since we came in, and that's sustaining. That's a very positive sign that both the economy is in a good place and that the city is on the right track to attract investment in the city. We have also implemented a long-term capital planning process. So this is one that seems obvious, but most cities have a plan for their future investments. They know how much they're going to spend on roads and bridges, on sidewalks, on parks, on their public buildings over the course of a 5 or 10 year horizon. The city did not have a capital plan when the mayor came into office. There was no borrowing plan in place for how we're going to continue to invest in our assets. What that means is a lot of our assets were falling into disrepair. That's why the roads were not properly maintained for decades. That is why our sidewalks are not in great condition. That is why our school buildings are also not in wonderful condition. The mayor and the city council have now put in a capital planning process so we know what investments we're making 5 years out, 10 years out, so we can plan for them. We can make sure we have the capacity to borrow money to pay for all of those investments, and that's critical for the city to be on a better path. We've also done this with our schools. As you probably saw, the governor and the mayor put in ballot measures over this last election to ask voters for money for school improvements. The voters agreed, and we are now going through a planning phase for the $310 million 5-year plan that the city is implementing. This is a massive, massive plan. We have about $1 billion worth of investments that we need to make in our schools so that they look better. This is an amazing start. We've got to do more. But again, this is done through strong, thoughtful planning. Okay, so one of the other things we often hear is, well, you should do pension reform. That's the answer. And I'll just say, I wanted to go through and say, we actually have done pension reform. The past administration, the Taveras administration, actually did pension reform in 2012, and the city continues to defend that reform in court today. That addressed some of the most egregious retiree benefits that exist, but it didn't fully fix the problem. What did it accomplish? As everyone probably remembers, the Taveras administration talked a lot about the looming threat of bankruptcy. It did prevent bankruptcy. It solved some medium-term problems the city had, but it didn't completely fix that longer-term deficit, but it did set us on a better path. So what we still need to do is adequately fund the pension system, pay for growing healthcare expenses, and close the structural deficit. I'll note that a lot of these financial terms probably don't make a whole lot of sense, and I'm trying to break them down as easily as I can, but please ask questions at the end if any of these terms are unfamiliar. So what about pension reform through current employees, through your union agreements? We get this a lot. Why don't you more aggressively cut benefits for current union members? Won't that help fix the liability problem? What this shows you is that it won't. It would have some impact, but not a great impact. When we pay our pension payment every single year, and I don't think you can see the number, this is the amount that goes to pay for retirees. This is the amount that goes to pay for current and future employees. This is 90%, this is 10%. What that means is we could negotiate contracts where we don't have any healthcare benefits, no raises, no retirement benefits for city employees, and it wouldn't move the needle enough to fix this problem.
Tax at 1%.
What other actions has the city considered? So talked about this union negotiations. We have actually been aggressive in our union negotiations over the past several years. We've reduced minimum manning in the fire department. We have moved a lot of our employees to a new healthcare plan. And generally speaking, new employees in Providence compared to other mid-sized cities receive fewer benefits overall than most other municipal employees in cities our size. So I don't want to say that we're not competitive from an employment standpoint, but it's not the best place to focus. We've looked at increasing taxes and fees. I'm noting that some of those tax and fee proposals would only have about $500,000 to $2 million per year impact, none of which have been embraced by the General Assembly and a lot of the interest groups that are interested in those particular tax areas. Those include the hotel tax, the meal and beverage tax, and the parking tax. You'll see all of those proposals laid out in this thing called the NRN report, a report the city did when the mayor came in to look at the big financial issues the city was facing. Those were a few of the recommendations in that report. So we actually try to pursue them and have not had success. We also have looked at taxing non-mission essential properties that are owned by nonprofits. So that includes universities, hospitals, and other large institutions. We actually have had a bill before the General Assembly for that for the past few years, and the General Assembly has not passed that legislation. What does that mean, non-mission essential? It's essentially if a college owns a parking lot and they're charging money for that parking lot and it's not necessarily for university use, or maybe they're hosting a Starbucks or a coffee shop or a for-profit business in their building. That's an example of a non-mission essential use because it's not for actually teaching and learning. Are there other alternatives? At this point, our alternatives are these: increased taxes, decreased quality of services. We can continue to decrease our investments in other parts of the city. And none of the options, even when combined, fix the problem. Because we've got $1 billion problem, $500,000 per year by increasing a hotel tax, or $500,000 to $1 million a year to increase another tax a little bit, isn't going to move the needle on this problem. It's too big for a lot of those solutions. So why Providence Water? So at this point, a huge portion of your tax dollars are going to pay for this retirement bill. So, you know, I pay taxes, a lot of us pay taxes. You'd hope that those taxes were going into the schools. You'd hope they were going into the roads. You'd hope they'd be going into the rec centers. You hope they'd be going to the things that your family uses. At this point, the proportion of money we are spending for that, on the pension fund as opposed to those things is not fair. In fact, it's incredibly unjust. So, what would happen if we put $400 million into the pension fund? Why am I picking 400? That's the value that we've gotten of the Providence Water asset that we have. This is what would happen. The pension payment would go down if we did this transaction in 2021. The pension payment would immediately go down $30 million per year. And over the course of the next 10 years, that reduction would go to $45 million per year. $30 million per year in the city's budget could result in tax decreases, greater investments in schools, greater investments in park and recreation facilities, investments in economic development, job training programs, and you know, kind of, sky's the limit. I kind of can't even conceive of what it would mean to have that amount of asset available to us. How would it work? Providence Water would enter into a partnership with an operator. I might actually go to this one first. The operator would operate under a lease of 30 to 50 years. That's pretty typical. Leases, I want to emphasize that we're talking about a lease, not an ownership agreement. An annual lease payment would be paid to the city, or in some cases, in other places, the actual operator provides an upfront payment. It kind of depends on the type of transaction. And partners would be required to protect employees, maintain stable water rates, ensure quality of water, and make routine infrastructure investments. So they basically be expected to operate as it operates now. Where they're able to actually gain dollars to be able to pay payment to the city is through economies of scale. Most of the operators of systems like this operate multiple systems throughout the region and United States. They can buy materials at a much cheaper rate. Their IT services are a much cheaper rate. And generally speaking, they're able to reduce the cost of operations just through some of those efficiencies. I want to be clear that the city is not looking to maximize profit in doing this type of transaction. We are trying to solve a long-term problem that is only going to get worse before...
When I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. When I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. That's what's happening.
So,
I was hungry, you did not feed me.
So if you wouldn't,
When I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink.
I'm happy to go back and forth, but if I could finish, that would be excellent. So this is only going to get worse if we don't fix it now. If we do not address this problem, in 10 to 15 years, the city will be facing a very perilous financial situation. In that position, we will not have the luxury of planning for a transaction that will solve this bigger issue and not maximize profit.
The tax Brown, tax Jacob.
Tax the rich, because I'm going to raise the wealth tax.
So I'm happy, so just if it's possible, just out of respect for everyone in the room, I'm happy to address the taxes that the nonprofits pay, if I could just get through the next few slides. So to go back, again, we would make sure that there's employee protections, we keep the unionized workforce that is in place, stabilize long-term rates, ensure the quality of the water so it continue to be regulated by the Department of Health, and rates would continue to be regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. Okay. So at this point, I think I'll get into FAQs unless anyone else on my team thinks I need to cover anything else. Okay. So I just want to quickly go through some FAQs. They've come up a bunch in other presentations. So a lot of people have said, Flint, Michigan changed their water source and ended up having a crisis. Isn't that what you're doing here? We are not changing the water source for Providence Water Supply members. Providence Water provides water for 60% of the state, and that water comes from the Scituate Reservoir. That water will continue to come from the Scituate Reservoir. It'll continue to flow through the pipes it flows through now, except for as we improve them, and it will continue to be maintained at the quality that it is maintained with right now. Are you selling Providence Water? No. It is critical to this administration, and it should be critical to every resident in the city, for this asset to remain in the public realm. It should not go to a private operator as a sale. We are looking at a lease arrangement. These are fairly common throughout the country. Again, a long-term lease for operation of the facility, and we are not looking to sell the facility.
Show us examples of it working.
The city says it doesn't want to privatize the system. What is the actual transaction? So again, this is what I talked about earlier. We're looking at a long-term lease, 30 to 50 years, where the city would get a lease payment, and we would leverage that lease payment to fix the financial problem that the city has with the pension fund, and that would allow us to spend more money on current services that are needed today. And if we do not solve this problem now, we will not be able to make investments in our schools and in city buildings and all of the assets that are critical to make sure that the city continues to thrive.
Water is life.
Where does this kind of partnership work throughout the country? There's actually no city that we've come up with that's in our exact situation. Most other cities have done this when they're further down the road and are facing bankruptcy. So what they're facing is a situation where they have to maximize profit or they go into bankruptcy. We are specifically trying to do this now before we end up in that situation so that we can get smaller amounts from the asset over the next 30 to 50 years. Leah, our sustainability director, talked about it last time in a very nice way. She said, we're looking to just rent a room in the house. We're not selling the house. We're trying to make a little bit of money on the asset so that we can leverage that to support the pension payment. We're not trying to maximize profit. Maximizing profit would be going to the highest bidder with no controls. We're looking to put significant controls on the management of this system so that we do not end up in a situation down the road that is problematic. So at this point, that concludes my presentation. We are going to do another presentation on the 25th at 6 p.m. And at this point, I'm going to call up our panelists to jump into a question and answer session.